Good evening, everybody. My name is Jacek Bartosiak. Welcome to Strategy and Future with Ms. Nicholas Myers. Hi, Nick.
Hi, Jacek. Good evening.
Yeah, and that will be episode 4 of the Zapad of the series covering the Zapad exercises that are happening right next to the Polish border. Yeah, so, Nick, what are the developments on day 4?
All right, so we are looking at the time frame between Sunday afternoon, it's the 12th of September, and then 6 p.m. Moscow time today, the 13th of September. That's the time that we're looking at for this 4th installment here. At this point, it's starting to get difficult to determine which units are activated in which places, simply because the Russian coverage is starting to switch a lot more towards technology-centric coverage of the large events. But we still have a couple of interesting deployment details, which I'll start with and then go into a bit more of the tactical developments. So the first thing to go through here, and I'll bring up our trusty map again, is that the two big exercises, as I've mentioned before, are at Mulino in the Nizhny Novgorod Oblast and Obrazliznovsky in Brest Oblast, right on the border between Brest and Grodno Oblast in Belarus. Sunday, Lukashenko actually went down to visit Obrazliznovsky, and today, on Monday, Putin went out to visit Mulino. So relatively early in the exercise for the head of state to visit these places. Typically, they only come in on either the last day or the second to last day. So it's quite probable that they will be visiting another one of the sites, possibly together when we get to the end. But in terms of other deployments, we now know that the 45th Guards Spetsnaz VDV Brigade, the Morris elite, which rarely puts out many press releases because they're pretty confidential in terms of what they literally do inside Russia, has been deployed forward to Brest. So that's probably the most important news for Poland itself. And they were involved in that trilateral nocturnal air assault and descent exercise with both the Belarusians and even, I think, 20 Kazakhs participated in it as well, just outside of Brest. We can now say a bit more that it appears that either the 4th Guards Tank Division has some elements in Mulino because of a reporting of T-80s there, which are not part of any of the other units there, or else that the 138th Guards Motor Rifle Brigade has moved out there, which would be part of the 6th Army from St. Petersburg. We do know the 6th Army HQ and C2 is being operated out of Mulino, even though at least one of the 6 Army brigades is almost 1,000 kilometers away over here in Luga. So some pretty long-range C2 is going on. You'll also recall that the Belarusians and the Russians have been doing a separate joint exercise between the 98th Guards Airborne Division and the Belarusian 5th Spetsnaz Brigade. That exercise is now over. The Belarusians went home on Sunday. It appears that 98th Guards Airborne Division has now been redeployed up to the far north to participate in the Arctic Expeditionary Group exercise, where they're currently now moving forces away from the original locations along the Norwegian border up into the Stredin Peninsula for a couple of joint exercises with the Northern Fleet. The 98th Guards Airborne Division is usually the VDV force that goes to the Arctic when they're doing big exercises, but now all Western VDV forces have been committed. At least they have at least some role going on in these two twin exercises that are occurring. The 106th Guards Airborne Division has also actually made its deployment into the Ryazan Oblast today, as they said that they were going to do. Again, happening a bit sooner than I would have expected in this exercise. And that's where we're getting into the more interesting parts of what's going on at large here. I said last night that this was the first exercise in which Zapad is not supposed to have, or did not overtly have, two main phases, as they have had in 2013, 2009, and 2017. That kind of changed last night, after we had done the recording with Albert, but before we posted it this morning. They're now saying that there is a main stage to, or Glavny Etap, to the exercise that is going to be somewhat different from the prologue, I suppose. But this is a very different term. It's not the second stage, it's the main stage, so to speak. And that has been the impetus for a very, very large scale defensive to counteroffensive exercise in Molino today, featuring, among other things, thermobaric weapons, Iskander strikes, actually strike UAVs, which they've been developing for some time but have not been fielded yet. A couple of new infantry fighting vehicles that had been previously only in the media as being future testing things. Inahanit's strike UAV, for example, the BM-19. So a number of interesting new technologies are being deployed out there, as well as remote mining activities. So it's some interesting stuff's going on, but that's sort of sucking up a lot of the attention at the moment. I think the more interesting point here is that I was discussing last night that we have four conventional phases to Russian hybrid warfare. That hybridная concept that they could believe the West is perpetrating against them. And I usually don't like the term hybrid warfare, but I use it here because the Russians are increasingly using it themselves. And obviously the first one is the lighter blue because it's exercised pretty infrequently. It may not actually be part of this concept. But whereas I'm going into a large amount of detail last time that this phase 2 of the insertion of terrorists that was the phase 1 of Zapad 2017 and Soyuza 2019 was scripted as having already occurred before the exercise started. And so we were going straight to phase 3. I was talking last night that we might be able to see what phase 4 was, the next level up on the ladder of escalation, presumably sub-nuclear weapons. And I've had speculated last night that this was going to be a use of weapons of mass destruction by the opposing blue forces, and how was Russia going to respond? But it's actually slightly different. We may still see weapons of mass destruction be used, but we now have some better answer for what's going on. Phase 4, which we're not entirely sure what the blue side is going to be, so I kind of have this refusal to give up question mark here, but they're going to be using something called a mobile strike echelon. This is quite interesting. It's probably a bit different from the mobile echelon from Kavkaz 2020. This appears to be a variation on the Soviet airborne tactics, airborne operational concepts that were thought of at the time. And what's quite curious is it appears to be a doubling down on the nonlinear model of warfare. Because back in the Soviet era, when you were going to do a very large-scale airborne exercise, this was very much an operational activity. It was not supposed to be permanently operating by itself. It was designed to disrupt the enemy and allow an operational maneuver group to subsequently penetrate through the area that isolated by the airborne attack behind the main front, and then enable the airborne attack to be relieved. What we're seeing here appears to be, by use of the term echelon and just the type of tactics we're seeing, is that the VDV is going to be leading a whole bunch of counter-strike operations, possibly over the borders of the Union state. We'll see how it gets scripted. My suspicion is that the exercise is probably going to not comment on whether or not they actually left the borders of Russia and Belarus. There might be subsequent revelations, but there might also be declarations, no, we never left the borders. I don't think that they're going to do that in real life. It would just be a scripting mechanism if they did. But still, this is quite interesting that we're now moving on to this being a strategic and also purely, not necessarily just for the operational, but a strategic and possibly even just tactical descent move in order to try to destroy the enemy's remaining resolve by doing, by hitting something particularly important. Because this notion that they're going to be able to do a mobile echelon, but have a strike capability, suggests that they're not going to be relieved by a conventional line or just a line of communications. This is probably going to be operating entirely by resupply, either by air or by robbing the land, I suppose. So we did see something like this happen in Kavkaz 2020, and this is in fact what the Battalion Tactical Group, among other things, was originally invented for decades ago. But it's going to be extremely interesting to see, number one, do they pull it off fairly well across multiple different polygons, or do we see that they don't cover some of the polygons being mentioned? And secondly, do they use any air mobile groups from the ground forces as well? Very occasionally, we see that they practice this with non-airborne troops. In particular, the now division in Volgograd Oblast does practice an air mobile group, and they do it from time to time, very rarely in the Kaliningrad troops, and sometimes in a couple of other ones. But it's rather uncommon to do it. But if we see the ground forces involved in this, then we should start to assume this is the general direction that the Russian armed forces are going, is how do we do rapid response, nonlinear air mobile strategic actions in order to terminate a war. The last thing I would point out before I open up to any questions you have, Jacek, is that this is not entirely unprecedented. At the end of Zapad 2013, they did this on an extremely small scale. I think it was just one VDV company went around and tried to help encircle another unit. But even then, that was very much the old Soviet style of operational support, as opposed to trying to achieve a strategic end in and of the VDV itself. So this might be finally seeing the repercussions of many years of VDV reform over the past decade. So open up the questions you've got here.
Yeah, I'm quite curious what your assessment is as to whether the Russians are following the script in terms of strategic signaling. Are they, sort of transparent in what they want to convey? Or, for example, that they want to convey the message that nothing escalatory will happen, and you can see us in the openness that we are doing this and we are doing that. We report on this and report on that. Or they are creating some strategic ambiguity as to the particular movements and deployments during this particular exercise. So what is your assessment to that? How would you classify the Russian behavior during Zapad exercises this year in that respect?
So I'm constrained here by the fact that I'm only looking at open sources. So I do not know what kind of messages are being sent via the Vienna document and what so forth, if any are being sent, or where the attaches necessarily are at any given point. So I'm sure they're going to be invited to something towards the end. The degree of ambiguity I'm seeing in the official sources that I generally use is not really more ambiguous than it typically is for these exercises. As typical, the Belarusians are a bit more transparent about what unit is where than the Russians are. That is pretty generically normal. But there is some complication in that, as some other observers have been pointing out now, other than the official sources, there is remarkably little coming out about this exercise. There's a couple of supplementary things coming out via pro-Kremlin news agencies and news wires like TASS and RIA and Izvestia. But honestly, like 90% of the information we have is strict MOD propaganda, or at least the information I've seen so far, unless you're starting to count open source satellite imagery, such as the stuff that Conrad Musica continues to look through, which is quite interesting. I don't know how to contextualize it myself because I'm not really an image person, or not a good image person anyway. But I would say it's not more so than typical, though we do need to emphasize here that since the major component of the exercise so far has been in Molino, which is quite far from the NATO border for the exercise at large, it seems to be signaling that there is no offensive intent. That said, we do see two other things going on here. First, I forgot to mention the Indians did participate also in the airborne descent into the Ryazan polygon with the 106 Guards Airborne Division, which is quite unusual indeed. And also, we do not see much transparency at all about how the 1st Guards Tank Army is currently deployed. We do know where the 2nd Guards Motor Rifle Division and the 4th Guards Tank Division are supposedly based, but I still don't know on this, as of 6 p.m. Moscow time, if Major General Sergei Kizel, who's the commander of the 1st Guards Tank Army, is at his HQ in Moscow, if he's moved to Molino with the other Western Military District commands, if he's in Belarus. It's quite probable that somebody else who's doing OSINT knows a bit more about this than I do, but they would be looking through a bit more down in the weeds Twitter feeds and things of that nature. But at the moment, there's still a fair amount of uncertainty as to what is deployed where. Is there in fact something seeping up? But if I were you in Poland, I would not be terribly concerned that this exercise is going to turn into the start of a war. I would just be concerned about how much do we all have from military intelligence as to what the precise limits of the deployment is. Fortunately, us living in the unclassified world don't need to worry about that as part of our jobs anyhow.
Would you provide the audience with more details about this Iskander missile shot that occurred today and earlier during the day?
So a couple of things about it. First of all, there were 4 different units that were supposedly involved. It's a bit ambiguous in the source. It could be 4 pieces of Iskander equipment or 4 batteries that were involved in it. They were all at Molino. They've shot over a range pretty short for an Iskander at 50 kilometers. I think it said that they were not all ballistic or cruise missile capability, because Iskander infamously can do both. I think they said that they were doing both. And as is typical with these, with the Iskander tactics, the thought was to cripple the command and control of the opposing side in a direct precedence of doing a counteroffensive strike. Because the Molino exercise today did switch to the counteroffensive in the course of the single day. For an exercise this large, it's not terribly surprising that you would have this switch from defensive to counteroffensive occurring within the same day. It is a bit unusual that it happens so quickly within something that's going to be as long as Zapad is. Because after all, we still have 3 more days of this exercise. So there's quite a lot of time there, quite a lot of time yet for scripting to occur that would suggest that the stalled, or that the enemy is using a new tactic that's causing new complications that require an escalation.
And one more question I would have concerning the Belarusian side. How would you assess the wear and tear of their forces during the exercises? I've heard reports that they are on their last leg, so to speak, and that they sort of betray the symptoms of exhaustion and shortages in capabilities during exercises even, and they had to be supplemented. Even their roles were need to be fulfilled by the Russian deployments. So how would you react to that?
Obviously, working mostly with official sources, I haven't seen too much of that yet, but that would not surprise me in the least. I mean, they're deploying Tochkas still after Kazakhstan. I don't remember how many countries still use the Tochka, but I know Russia has finally completely retired its Tochka arsenal, I believe, 2 years ago now. We need to remember, of course, that last week, when Lukashenko came to visited the Kremlin, they apparently went into some considerable detail about arms sales, even though it was supposed to be a harmonization of legal systems within the Union State meeting, as it was officially reported at the time. So I'm guessing that Lukashenko might be allowing the Belarusian armed forces to pull out the stops to demonstrate just how badly they need upgrades to everything. That would be his modus operandi in order to get additional free stuff. The Belarusian Air Force is right at the start of doing some rearmament right now. So you've probably seen already that have the initial deliveries of Su-30 SM fighter bombers over the past year. I forget if it started before the past year, but starting to do deliveries now. Lukashenko is becoming a bit louder about how he wants S-400 system, and apparently Putin even went over how S-500 procurement functions when he was at the Kremlin last week. It is true that there has been remarkably little detail about how the Belarusian Air Force is performing, though there's been the typical amount of visibility as to how it is operating, like where the individual units are currently participating at the different polygons within Belarus itself. As far as I'm aware, the wording in Russia is pretty ambiguous. It can be read that the Belarusians have sent aircraft into the operational airfields inside of Russia, but I think that's highly unlikely, and it is certainly not implied as necessary within the Russian statements. But I think it's fair to say that Lukashenko would be in the mindset of wanting to have these vulnerabilities displayed quite prominently in this exercise. So, like I said, it got kind of a frustrating answer. It would not surprise me in the least if that was going on, but I haven't seen any direct evidence of it. One other point that I forgot to mention the last couple of days, I finally found the source for it. I mentioned to Albert last night that one of the big surprises of the exercise so far has been a shocking degree of lack of coverage of the Poganovo polygon here near the Ukrainian border, or relatively near the Ukrainian border. Apparently there is some speculation, and I don't want to do this because I'm neither an epidemiologist nor keeping track of individual Russian regional medical information, but there's supposedly a dysentery epidemic going on there. The Russians claim is entirely Western information warfare. That sounds an awful lot like the old Yes Minister rule that never believe anything until it's been officially denied. So I don't know precisely what's going on there, but it may be complicating the original plot of this exercise.
Yeah.
But I think at this point, that should do us for this evening. Like I said, the big thing that we need to watch now is, number one, how rapidly and simultaneously do the mobile strike echelons from the VDV start to operate around the different polygons? What size are they getting to? They're at much larger than they used to be 5 odd years ago, but we're still talking in the range of about a battalion or a company plus size of people. So 400 to 800 people being dropped, typically from about 20 Il-76 heavy transports. And thirdly, do we see ground forces being used in the air mobile groups as part of this large operation? If we see only 1 or 2, that's probably what I would guess is going to happen. If we see it happening like 10 or more, or even 5 or more, then we know that there's been some serious successful reforms in the Russian ground forces of late.
Yeah.
Answer that in 2 days or so.
Okay, so let's stop now, Nick, and let's keep some more information, and I'll send for the next day. Okay, so basically that's it. Thank you very much. Nick Myers was our guest, and it will be tomorrow, where we'll be continuing covering Zapad exercises. My name is Jacek Bartosiak. Yeah, thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Stay with us at Strategy and Future. More to come.